They called it an incident. Lydia Warren called it her awakening. While her daughter lay in a hospital bed, hooked to machines built by the same system that broke her, Lydia stood in that corridor and made a promise. She would burn the department down, by the book. The corridor hummed with the kind of light that erased shadows. Cold, unwavering fluorescent, it painted the walls in sterile indifference, bleaching every surface into sameness. The linoleum floor, the pale blue chairs, the hands of the nurses who passed by without looking. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and waiting, a mixture of alcohol wipes, fear, and the faint trace of burnt coffee drifting from a distant break room. Lydia Warren sat at the end of the hallway, her back straight, her coat folded neatly beside her. Her posture carried the stillness of a verdict. The clock above the nurses' station ticked with slow precision, marking time not as movement, but as endurance. Behind the wall of glass, her daughter lay motionless. Tubes, wires, and machines crowded the bed, each one speaking in small mechanical pulses. A screen blinked green with measured consistency, a heartbeat rendered into data. Lydia watched it without blinking, her gaze steady as if it alone could keep the line from flattening. The glass was so clean it looked airless. She could see every detail, the white sheets, the faint rise and fall of her child's chest, the bandage wrapping her temple, yet the space between them might as well have been an ocean. Transparency offered no entry. A nurse approached holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Warren." Lydia turned her head slightly, nothing more. "They're adjusting her oxygen levels. Just a routine change. Everything's stable for now." The nurse smiled, a small, professional reflex one, and moved on. Lydia said nothing. The words stable and routine meant nothing in the aftermath of brutality. Stability was the language of those untouched. She folded her hands in her lap. Her fingers had gone pale from pressing together too long. She thought of the night before, though she did not want to. The phone call, the drive, the way the officer at the desk had said her daughter's name without lowering his voice, like reading an entry from a report. Imani Warren, age 17. Every memory of that moment had been absorbed by the same clinical tone that filled the hospital now. A janitor rolled a cart down the hall, mops and disinfectant rattling in quiet rhythm. He avoided her eyes. Everyone did. It was easier that way, to pass grief as though it were contagious. Through the glass, a doctor entered the room, checking monitors, adjusting wires. He spoke to a nurse, his voice muffled. Lydia watched the doctor's hands, not his face. They moved efficiently, impersonally, the movements of someone accustomed to managing aftermath. She wondered if he had seen the footage, if he knew that the bruises beneath those white bandages were not from an accident, not from a fall, but from men in uniform who called her daughter girl as they struck her. The doctor left. The machines went on breathing. Lydia rose slowly, as if testing gravity. She approached the glass, stopping close enough that her breath fogged a faint circle onto its surface. She placed her palm against it, a gesture so small it barely disturbed the air, and felt nothing. The glass stayed cold, indifferent. Her reflection hovered over her daughter's still face. Two versions of the same woman, one standing, one sleeping, both trapped. She whispered, "I'm here." Though she knew Imani could not hear, the words slipped into the quiet and dissolved, absorbed by the mechanical rhythm of life support. Behind her, footsteps. A voice, soft, hesitant. "Mrs. Warren, do you need anything? Water? Something to eat?" She didn't turn. "No." The nurse lingered, waiting for permission to leave, then stepped away. The sound of her shoes receded down the hall. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. It was not peace. It was pressure. Lydia stared through the glass again. The fluorescent light flickered once, briefly breaking its perfect consistency. That momentary falter caught her attention. A flaw in the system, small but undeniable. She wondered how many flickers it took before the bulb finally gave out. A man at the far end of the corridor adjusted the blinds in the waiting room. Daylight seeped in, faint and colorless, bleeding across the sterile surfaces. It made the glass shimmer for an instant, and in that shimmer Lydia saw motion, the past rushing against the present. Her daughter's laughter filling the small kitchen at home. Sunlight on brown skin, the world still intact. Then it was gone. The hum of the machines reasserted itself, steady as a pulse. Lydia returned to her chair. She sat, folded her hands again. A nurse walked past carrying a stack of forms. Each page bore a patient's name, a diagnosis, a signature, evidence that care had been given. Systems loved signatures. They turned tragedy into paperwork. Somewhere in the building, an elevator chimed. Somewhere a phone rang. Life went on efficiently. Hours passed without acknowledgement. No one told her to go home, but no one invited her to stay either. She existed in the gray space between procedure and compassion. The hospital knew how to manage bodies. It did not know how to hold grief. Lydia's eyes never left the room beyond the glass. The machines blinked, the monitors pulsed, and she began to match her breathing to their rhythm, slow, mechanical, controlled. It was the only way to survive in a place that mistook stillness for compliance. A security guard appeared near the nurse's station. Young, nervous. He adjusted his badge, glanced at Lydia, then away. His presence wasn't necessary, not really, but protocol demanded surveillance when tragedy became public record. The badge caught the fluorescent light, a sharp glint of authority, meaningless and absolute. Lydia watched that glint until it faded. She thought of her daughter's face on the news, framed by headlines that called the attack an incident, the officers under review. The words built walls as effective as the glass before her. Transparency again, the illusion of seeing everything while understanding nothing. Night crept in unnoticed. The lights remained the same, unwavering, as if the world beyond had ceased to exist. Lydia's reflection grew darker in the glass, merging with the shape of her daughter's body on the bed, somewhere deep in the building. The ventilation system sighed in a long exhale. Mechanical and tired, she whispered again. "Quieter this time, I'm here." It was not comfort. It was declaration, and the corridor held it, the only sound that did not belong to the machines. The morning came without sunlight. The same hard fluorescent glare filled the corridor, unbothered by hours or grief. The machines in Imani's room continued their small conversation. The hiss of air, the beeping rhythm that counted each second with mathematical indifference. Lydia had not slept. Her coat hung over the chair like an abandoned skin. Her coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, untouched. The air held that peculiar chill of hospital mornings, the kind that makes everything, even sorrow, feel disinfected. When the detectives arrived, they came as if entering a meeting room, not a mother's vigil. 2 men in suits, dark fabric, pressed collars, expressions calibrated to neutrality. Their badges gleamed when the corridor light caught them. One held a folder. The other carried a small black recorder. Mrs. Warren. Lydia looked up. "I'm Detective Harper. This is Detective Mills. We're sorry to intrude, but we need to take your statement for the record." She rose slowly, steadying herself against the chair. "You want to take it here?" Harper offered a polite half-smile. "If you prefer another room, we can—" "Here is fine." He nodded as if her choice fit neatly into his schedule. Mills set the recorder on the small table beside her. Its red light blinked once, alive, listening. The corridor went quiet except for the hum of machinery. Harper pressed the button. "This is Detective Harper, badge 2541, conducting a statement with Mrs. Lydia Warren regarding the events of November 6th, involving her daughter Imani Warren." His voice was measured, official, drained of anything human, the kind of tone designed to make pain procedural. "Mrs. Warren," he began, "can you describe the last time you saw your daughter conscious?" Lydia's eyes flicked toward the glass. "Yesterday morning. She was leaving for school. Did she seem upset, angry?" The question landed with the weight of suspicion disguised as curiosity. "No." "Did she mention meeting anyone? Any conflict with teachers, friends, neighbors?" "She went to school," Lydia interrupted, her voice even. "She was wearing her uniform. She packed her lunch. She said, 'Love you, Mom,' and closed the door." Mills glanced at Harper, who made a note in the folder, meaningless scribbles that pretended to capture truth. "Did she have any history of disciplinary issues?" Lydia's silence stretched. Harper's pen paused midair. "No," she said finally. "My daughter's history is honor roll, volunteer hours, and staying out of trouble." "Is that the kind of history you're asking about?" Harper's mouth tightened, but he didn't answer. The recorder blinked again, silent and steady, marking each exchange like a heartbeat. They went on. questions layered with bureaucratic politeness. Had she been under any stress? Did she have a temper? Was she known to be cooperative with authority figures? Each word was a blade wrapped in civility. Lydia could feel the shape of the accusation forming between the lines, that somehow, before the blows landed, her daughter had earned them. Through the glass, the machines continued their indifferent work. Harper shifted his weight. "Mrs. Warren, we're just trying to establish a full picture." "The picture is already on your cameras," Lydia said. Her voice was low, almost calm. "You don't need me to paint it for you." Mills cleared his throat. "We understand this is difficult." "No," she said. "You don't." The younger detective looked away. Harper, unfazed, clicked his pen. "Do you recall what time you received the call from the precinct?" 10:47 p.m., and the officer who called didn't give his name. Harper made another note. His composure didn't falter, but Lydia saw the small tension in his jaw. Not guilt, just the weariness of procedure. He was not a villain, not exactly. He was the system wearing human skin. The tape recorder captured everything. Her voice, his questions, the small static between them. It would be filed, transcribed, summarized, turned into a paragraph in a report that would be read by people who would never see her daughter's bruises. After 40 minutes, Harper stopped recording. "Thank you, Mrs. Warren. We appreciate your cooperation." The phrase sounded mechanical, like something said 100 times before. He stood, buttoning his jacket. Mills gathered the folder and recorder. For a moment, Harper hesitated, as if he wanted to offer comfort but couldn't find a version that wouldn't sound scripted. "She's in good hands here," he said finally. Lydia looked at him. "You really believe that?" He didn't answer. He nodded, professional, and they walked away. The corridor swallowed their footsteps, leaving only the faint hum of life support machines. The red light on the recorder had stopped blinking, but its absence felt louder than its presence, as if silence itself had been recorded, filed, archived. Lydia sat back down. Her reflection appeared again in the glass, a woman surrounded by systems that spoke in codes and protocols, every phrase designed to smooth the edges of violence. She imagined the words "for the record" printed on the page. Clean, bureaucratic, lifeless. Somewhere inside those pages, they would bury her daughter's story beneath layers of administrative grammar. Lydia folded her arms tightly across her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held them still until the shaking stopped. From the nurse's station, a printer clicked in Word, paper sliding out, ink drying instantly. Another record. Another form. Another story reduced to black text on white paper. She rose again, walked to the glass, and stared through it. The machines blinked, the lights flickered. She could almost hear the echo of the detective's voice repeating, "We appreciate your cooperation." That word, cooperation, lodged itself somewhere deep inside her, cold and sharp. For the first time, she understood the shape of what she was up against. It wasn't just the men who had struck her daughter. It was the language that followed, the official tone, the paper trail, the machinery of indifference that made every cruelty sound like procedure. Lydia looked at her reflection one last time. Then she whispered, not to Imani, not to anyone in particular, but to the air itself, "I'm done cooperating." Night returned to the house like an intruder. It carried no warmth, no promise of rest, only the dim hum of electronics, the stale air of untouched rooms, and the cold weight of waiting. Lydia sat at her kitchen table, the only light coming from the laptop screen before her. The glow flattened her face, turned her skin pallid. Beside the computer, a glass of water sweated onto a stack of unopened mail. The refrigerator hummed behind her like a low, indifferent witness. She had avoided it all day. The video. She'd seen the thumbnail already. A still frame of blue lights reflected on wet pavement, blurred figures, the outline of a girl in a hoodie. The caption read, "Police body cam footage, incident under investigation." The word incident again, everywhere now. The country's favorite euphemism. She pressed play. The sound came first. Too loud, too real. Static, then shouts. Then her daughter's voice, small but clear. "I didn't do anything." That voice. The pitch of panic she had never heard before, not even when Imani was little and afraid of thunderstorms. The image shook as the officer moved, body cam jolting with each step. The light from the cruiser headlights caught flashes of movement. Arms raised, faces blurred. Commands layered over each other. Hands where I can see them. Stop resisting. Down on the ground! Then the first thud. Then another. Lydia's breath faltered. The camera caught a fragment of her daughter's face as she fell, eyes wide, one cheek pressed against the asphalt. A moment later, the lens turned away, fixed on boots, on shadows, on the ground. There was no sound of compassion. Only heavy breathing, radios crackling. The distant drone of sirens coming too late, then silence. Lydia paused it there. The frame froze on the streetlight overhead, a halo of harsh light suspended in the darkness. The video timestamp blinked in the corner, pitilessly objective. 22:31:06. She stared at the still image for a long time. Then she rewound, play, static. I didn't do anything, thud, pause. Rewind, play, pause again. Each replay became its own ritual, the mechanical rhythm of grief. Proof, disbelief, proof again. Somewhere in the repetition, she searched for something the camera might have missed. A hand raised, a hesitation, a voice that said, "Stop." But there was nothing. The footage was too clean, too efficient in its cruelty. After the seventh replay, she muted the sound. Watching the violence in silence made it worse. Without the noise, the movements became clinical. An anatomy lesson in how systems break bodies. The light from the screen flickered across her face. Her eyes did not move. On the kitchen counter, the clock read 2:47 a.m. Time had lost shape. She leaned forward, pressing the space bar again. The video replayed from the beginning. The same shouting, the same collapse, the same silence. It looped endlessly, like a confession that no one would listen to. When the video ended for the 10th time, she let it keep playing into the black screen. A small icon appeared, recommended for you. Other videos, other names, other mothers. Different streets, same story. Her stomach turned. Lydia closed the laptop. The screen went dark, and her reflection surfaced in the blankness. Her face divided by the faint white line of the laptop hinge. She didn't recognize herself. The house felt impossibly large around her. Every wall echoed the memory of sound. The thud, the voice, the silence. She stood and walked to the living room. On the mantel, a photo of Imani at age 10 smiled back at her. Front teeth uneven, hair braided neatly, holding a small trophy from a school debate. Lydia touched the glass of the frame with 2 fingers, the same way she had touched the hospital window. Cold again. Always cold. In the distance, sirens wailed. Not the same ones, but close enough. The city never slept. It only repeated. She returned to the kitchen and reopened the laptop. Her hand trembled as she searched the headlines. Local. Seen hospitalized after police altercation. Authorities say force was within policy. Community demands transparency. Each headline was a performance of concern, stripped of conviction. Each one flattened her daughter into a symbol before the world even knew her name. She found the video again on a news site, muted, edited, watermarked. A journalist's voiceover played. The footage shows the suspect resisting arrest. The suspect. Lydia slammed the lid shut. For a moment, the silence that followed was absolute, the kind that vibrated in the bones. She sat very still. Her heartbeat was the only sound left. After a while, she stood and walked to the sink. She poured out the glass of water and let it run, the stream hitting metal with steady rhythm. She stared at it, the clean, endless flow, and thought of how evidence was supposed to wash away doubt. But the world had already learned how to stay dirty in plain sight. On the table behind her, the laptop's charging light blinked, slow, persistent, like the body cam's red dot. Watching her, recording her, waiting for her to press play again, she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she sank back into the chair and folded her hands on the table. The repetition of stillness felt like control. If she could not undo what happened, she could master how she endured it. Her mind replayed the sound anyway. The voice, the thud, the silence, over and over, until finally she whispered into the dark almost without realizing it. They'll see. So you'll be seen. The words hung there, steady, unblinking, like the red light of the camera refusing to die. The room smelled of starch, microphones, and self-importance. It was the department's main hall. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, the seal of the city bolted behind a wooden podium polished to a sheen. Rows of folding chairs faced forward, filled with journalists, cameras, and a few quiet citizens clutching notepads. The air buzzed with anticipation and spectacle, the choreography of public accountability. Rehearsed and hollow, Lydia Warren sat in the back row, hands folded in her lap, her coat draped neatly across her knees. No one noticed her come in. No one looked back. The attention flowed forward to the podium, where truth would soon be performed. On the platform stood the chief of police, tall, broad, deliberate in posture. His uniform gleamed under the lights, medals perfectly aligned. Behind him stood 3 officers in formal stance, hands clasped behind their backs, eyes forward. A wall of order. The chief adjusted the microphone. Cameras clicked, rapid bursts like insects. "Good afternoon," he began. His voice carried the practiced warmth of a man accustomed to authority. "First, let me say that the city police department takes this matter very seriously. Our thoughts are with the family of Miss Imani Warren during this difficult time." Thoughts. The word drifted through the room like perfume. Pleasant, meaningless. Lydia's gaze fixed on the podium. It was sturdy, oak-colored, its edges rounded smooth. To anyone else it was furniture. To her it looked like a shield. The kind used not to protect bodies but to deflect accountability. The chief continued, reading from a statement. "As you know, an incident occurred last Friday evening involving one of our patrol units and a young woman. At this time, preliminary review indicates that the officers followed proper procedure in response to a situation involving resistance and potential threat." A low murmur moved through the press. Words scribbled, microphones angled closer. Lydia didn't move. "Body cam footage has been released," the chief said. "We ask the public to remain patient as the Internal Affairs Division conducts its review. We are committed to transparency." That word, transparency, landed like glass breaking inside her. She could see right through it. He kept speaking, layering sentences with bureaucratic precision. "Our officers face difficult situations daily. Protocol exists to protect both civilians and law enforcement. We regret any harm caused." Every phrase was scrubbed clean of emotion, smoothed into neutrality. The language of power had always known how to sound reasonable. From the front row, a reporter raised her hand. "Chief, given that the victim remains in a coma, do you consider this use of force justified?" The chief's jaw tensed. "As I said, the matter is under review. It's premature to make judgments before the facts are fully established." Another voice. "Why were 3 officers required to subdue an unarmed teenager?" He offered a patient smile, the kind that asked for understanding rather than truth. "I can't comment on specifics until the investigation concludes. But I will say our officers acted in accordance with department training." In accordance. The phrase landed like a verdict. Lydia could feel the air around her thinning. The room was full, but somehow she felt alone, as though watching through the same glass wall as at the hospital. She imagined the chief's words drifting upward, filing themselves neatly into a report, spoke with empathy, avoided liability, maintained composure. Another question came out about public trust, about community anger, and the chief leaned closer to the microphone. "We understand emotions are high," he said, "but we ask the public to remember that law enforcement officers are human beings, doing their jobs under extreme pressure." That word again, human, always invoked when power wanted pity. Lydia watched the man's hands resting on the podium, steady, controlled, not a tremor in sight. They were the hands of someone confident that systems would hold, that the machinery behind him, visible and invisible, would absorb the heat of the moment and cool it into routine. She imagined her daughter's hands, smaller, trembling, reaching out that night, and the baton that met them instead. The contrast was unbearable in its symmetry. One hand holding a weapon, another holding a statement. Both built to strike. The reporters kept pressing. "What do you say to the growing protests outside?" "We respect the public's right to peaceful demonstration," he replied smoothly. "But we urge everyone to avoid misinformation and wait for the process to unfold." The process. That sacred word. The process was the new prayer. Lydia leaned back, her chair creaking softly. Around her, heads nodded, pens scratched. The theater continued. She noticed how the light fell across the podium, bright above, shadowed below. It gave the chief's face an almost sacred glow, while everything beneath, including his hands and the microphones, was swallowed by darkness. Symbolism, unintentional yet perfect. Truth hidden beneath performance. After 40 minutes, the chief concluded, "We will not rest until every question has been answered, and justice, woe, whatever that may look like, is served. Whatever that may look like." Even justice, it seemed, was negotiable. Applause broke out. Cameras flashed again, light bouncing off badges, off medals, off the podium's varnished surface. Lydia did not clap. She stood quietly, gathering her coat. No one noticed her exit. Not the reporters, not the officers, not the cameras. Power rarely noticed those who refused to participate in its rituals. As she reached the door, she paused. She turned once more toward the stage. The chief was stepping down from the podium, shaking hands, smiling for cameras. Behind him, the city's seal gleamed gold against the beige wall, its motto carved in Latin, Servir et protéger, to serve and protect. The words looked carved in stone, unchanging, unquestioned. Lydia left the room. Outside, the hallway was empty except for a single custodian pushing a cart. The faint echo of applause still carried through the closed door. She walked past without a word, her footsteps measured, deliberate. Through a window at the end of the corridor, she could see the crowd gathered outside the building, signs raised, voices rising. From this distance, their chants were indistinct, but their rhythm was unmistakable. She stood there a moment watching. Between her and them only the glass. Always the glass. In the reflection, she saw herself standing in that sterile corridor again, her daughter behind another wall of transparency. Two scenes, one truth. The system always spoke through barriers. She whispered to herself, "They speak of regret, but not of guilt." Her reflection did not answer. It only stared back unflinching. The city council chamber was not built for grief. It was built for process, for words to be spoken, recorded, sanitized, and filed away. The ceilings were too high, the lighting too white, the air too still. Everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and carpet cleaner, as if sorrow itself had to pass inspection before being allowed inside. Lydia Warren sat at the witness table, her palms flat against the cool surface. In front of her lay a small stack of papers, edges aligned, untouched. Her hands trembled once, lightly, then steadied. She kept them there, visible. The tremor was not something to hide. Above her, the fluorescent lights buzzed in restless unison, a mechanical hum that filled the pauses between questions. Cameras lined the back wall. Their red recording lights blinked with steady rhythm. Indifferent eyes trained on her. Across from her sat the committee, 7 city officials arranged in a row like an assembly line of judgment. Their nameplates gleamed under the lights. Councilmember Reed, Chair, Councilmember Dawson, Councilmember Price, names that sounded heavy with procedure. The chair cleared his throat. "Mrs. Warren, thank you for being here today. We understand how difficult this must be." Lydia nodded, her lips pressed together. She did not thank him. He continued, "This hearing is to ensure transparency and accountability regarding the incident involving your daughter, Imani Warren, and the officers of the City Police Department. We appreciate your cooperation. Transparency. Again that word. She could almost taste its sterility. The stenographer at the corner typed steadily, head down. The sound of keys filled the air, the rhythm of bureaucracy recording emotion in monochrome. Councilmember Dawson leaned forward. "Mrs. Warren, could you please describe your understanding of what happened on the night of April 12th? Lydia lifted her eyes slowly. For a moment she looked at each face in the row, faces that had already decided how much sympathy was safe to show. Then she spoke. "My daughter," she said, "was walking home." Her voice was steady, low. She was stopped, questioned, and beaten until she stopped breathing. A silence settled over the room. Not empathy, calculation. The kind of silence that weighed risk. Councilmember Price adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Warren, we understand your grief. But according to the report, your daughter resisted." Lydia's eyes sharpened. "She was 17. The man hesitated. "Yes, but the officers..." She weighed 115 pounds, she said, her voice tightening but unbroken. 3 officers. Full gear, batons. The stenographer's typing slowed. Even Keyes could sense discomfort. Chairman Reed interjected gently. Mrs. Warren, we aren't here to argue facts. We're here to establish understanding. Lydia almost smiled, the small, bitter kind that never reached the eyes. Understanding, she repeated. Is that what we're doing? A murmur ran through the audience, a faint ripple of unease. Cameras zoomed closer. She lowered her gaze to her folded papers, though she still didn't open them. She had written everything down the night before. Details, questions, pleas. But now the words on those pages seemed too clean for what had happened. The truth didn't live in ink. It lived in the tremor of her fingers, the tightness in her chest, the hollow echo of a monitor's beeping. Council Member Dawson spoke again. Mrs. Warren, what outcome do you hope for from this process? That word again, process. Always process. Lydia straightened her back. The tremor in her hands grew slightly, visible now under the sterile light. I hope, she said slowly, for a world where my daughter's body is not treated as evidence before it's treated as human. For a heartbeat, the entire room stopped moving. Even the buzzing lights seemed to falter. Then the chair shifted his papers, a crisp sound that reset the rhythm of procedure. Thank you, Mrs. Warren. We understand your position. We'll now open the floor to questions from other members. A councilwoman on the far right, younger than the rest, cautious in her tone, leaned toward the microphone. Mrs. Warren, she said, I can't imagine what you're going through. But if you could tell us what justice looks like to you personally? Lydia's eyes met hers. Justice, she said, isn't an apology. It's consequence. Real ones. The woman hesitated, nodding faintly. Thank you. Councilmember Price interjected again, clearing his throat. Mrs. Warren, surely you understand that these officers are part of a system that operates under immense strain. Mistakes, while tragic, can happen under pressure. Lydia's voice cut through, quiet but sharp as glass. My daughter was not a mistake. The man flinched, barely, but enough. The chair shifted uneasily in his seat. Let's maintain order, please. Order, always order. Lydia's hands trembled again, but not from weakness. Every muscle in her body wanted to rise to shatter the polished calm of this room, but she didn't. She kept her palms pressed flat to the table, forcing herself into stillness. The act of restraint became its own form of protest. Behind the committee, a large clock ticked audibly. Each second stretched, deliberate, indifferent. Councilmember Reed glanced toward the press section. We appreciate Mrs. Warren's testimony. The committee will review all statements and proceed with recommendations to the Oversight Board. Another promise to nowhere. The stenographer's fingers hovered over the keys, then resumed, documenting the illusion of justice in real time. Lydia gathered her papers, aligning them once more into a perfect stack. Her hands were shaking again, but her face remained composed. She rose slowly, the chair scraping softly against the carpet. The cameras followed her as she walked toward the exit. Flashes sparked, questions called out, microphones stretched toward her. Mrs. Warren, do you believe the officers should be charged? Do you trust the investigation? What would your daughter want? She didn't answer. Silence, she'd learned, was not absence. It was control. At the door, she paused, turned back once more. The committee members had already begun speaking among themselves. Soft voices, procedural tones. The hearing wasn't over. It was merely continuing without her. Lydia looked at the table where she'd sat, her papers still perfectly arranged. The faint imprint of her trembling hands remained visible on the polished surface, a mark of presence the record would never mention. She turned and left. Outside, the corridor lights were dimmer, the air cooler. The door closed behind her with a muffled click, the sound of a system sealing itself shut. She exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing against one another, feeling the small, involuntary tremor return. It no longer felt like weakness. It felt like movement, like something alive that refused to still. The parking garage smelled of oil, wet concrete, and fear. It was late, somewhere between night and morning when the city had gone quiet, but the hum of fluorescent light still persisted. The upper levels were empty, save for the occasional drip of water from a leaking pipe. the echo of a distant car door, the shiver of wind slipping through metal vents. Lydia stood beside a concrete pillar, her coat pulled close. The air was colder here than outside, as if the structure itself exhaled something stale. Overhead, a single bulb flickered. Its light trembled the way truth does before it's spoken. Sergeant Torres arrived 7 minutes late. She moved quickly, scanning the shadows before stepping into the narrow pool of light. Her uniform jacket was zipped up halfway, her badge covered by the fold of her scarf. "Mrs. Warren," she said quietly, her breath visible. "You shouldn't have asked for this meeting." Lydia's voice was calm, deliberate. "And yet you came." Torres hesitated. She looked younger up close, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes. There was a faint tremor in her hand as she reached into her coat pocket. Not fear of Lydia, but of everything else surrounding them. "I can't stay long," she said. "If anyone sees me here—" "No one will," Lydia interrupted. Her tone wasn't cruel, just certain. The voice of someone who had already walked through worse kinds of darkness. Torres exhaled slowly. "You shouldn't be here either. You're being watched. Calls logged, messages flagged. They always do that after an incident like this." Lydia's eyes didn't move. "You said you had information." Torres hesitated again, glancing toward the ramp that led down to the lower levels, a stretch of black concrete vanishing into deeper shadow. "You don't understand," she murmured. "What happened to your daughter?" "It's not just the officers who were there. The whole chain of reports, footage, dispatch records, all of it's been altered." The word hung in the air like exhaust. Lydia took a step closer. "You're saying there's a cover-up?" Torres nodded once. "There's always a cover-up. But this one started before the video ever leaked." The bulb above them flickered again, cutting the light in half. Shadows moved across their faces like shifting masks. Torres spoke faster now, as if afraid her courage might evaporate if she stopped. "There's a memo, internal, dated the day after the incident. It says the officers responded to an escalating threat and that standard restraint protocols were followed. It's signed by someone who wasn't even on duty that night." Lydia's hands tightened around the strap of her bag. "You have a copy?" Torres shook her head. "Not anymore. They scrubbed the files. I only saw it because I was assigned to archive the reports. But I remember the names." She hesitated, scanning the empty levels again. Her voice lowered. "Lieutenant Garvey, Captain Mills, and Chief Emerson. The same man who stood at that podium pretending to mourn your daughter." The words echoed off the walls, each one hitting concrete and coming back quieter, like guilt fading on the return. Lydia studied her. "Why are you telling me this?" Torres swallowed. "Because it's wrong." A pause. "And because I can't keep doing it." "Then testify," Lydia said. The sergeant's face hardened, almost defensive. "You think it's that simple? You think they won't bury me too?" Her voice cracked, the echo breaking unevenly through the garage. "You don't know what happens to cops who talk. They stop getting backup. They get reassigned. Then they get forgotten." Lydia took another step forward, her shadow merging with Torres's under the flickering light. "And what happens to mothers who stay quiet?" Torres looked away. Somewhere below, a car engine started. The sound climbed the concrete ramp like a slow warning. "I can't get involved," Torres whispered. "Not officially. I have a kid. A mortgage. They know exactly how to make people like me disappear without firing a shot." "Then why tell me?" Torres exhaled, eyes wet but steady. "Because someone needs to know. Because you look like the kind of woman who won't stop." Lydia's silence was sharper than any promise. The light above them buzzed again, louder this time. The flicker cast alternating moments of visibility and darkness, as if the scene itself couldn't decide whether to exist. Torres shifted her weight, anxious to leave. "I have to go. I've already said too much." Lydia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. Imani at 12, standing in front of a school mural, smiling with paint on her fingers. She held it out, arm steady despite the cold. "This is who they buried under their paperwork." Torres hesitated, then looked at the photo. The sight of the girl, alive, unbroken, stripped something from her posture. For the first time, she stopped looking over her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Truly, Lydia didn't blink. "Sorry is for accidents." Torres flinched, then turned away. Her footsteps echoed down the ramp, fading into concrete silence. Lydia remained there, alone beneath the trembling light. The concrete walls seemed to close in around her, holding the echoes of the conversation, trapping the words so they couldn't escape into daylight. She pressed her back against the pillar, closed her eyes. The air smelled of gasoline and wet stone. In her mind, she could still hear the sergeant's voice. "You're being watched," and beneath it, the unspoken truth, "They're all afraid." She opened her eyes again. The light flickered once more, then steadied. A final, exhausted glow. On the far wall, faint graffiti in fading blue paint caught her eye. A single word, loyalty. The irony was perfect. Loyalty. The code that silenced truth, the wall that guarded power. The color of it matched their uniforms. Lydia stepped closer, tracing the letters with her fingertips. The paint was flaking, the wall damp. Beneath the blue, a layer of gray concrete showed through. Cold. "Or real," she whispered, almost to herself. "Even walls crack." Then she turned and walked toward the exit ramp, her footsteps echoing against the concrete, each one sharper, more deliberate. Behind her, the light flickered out. By late afternoon, the street in front of the police headquarters was no longer a street. It had become a heartbeat, pulsing, rhythmic, alive with the sound of thousands of voices refusing to go unheard. The air trembled with chants. "Say her name. Say her name." Cardboard signs rose and fell like waves. "Justice for Imani. No more lies. Protect our children." The asphalt shimmered under the heat of bodies pressed together, the weight of outrage rising in the air like humidity before a storm. Police barriers lined the steps of the department, metal fences, shoulders squared, sunglasses reflecting the crowd. Behind them, the tall glass doors of the precinct shone like mirrors, returning every face to itself. Lydia Warren stood at the edge of the protest, her presence almost invisible amid the movement. She didn't chant. She didn't raise a sign. She simply stood, a single still figure in the chaos, her black coat buttoned to the throat, her gaze fixed on the building that had taken her daughter and offered words instead of remorse. Around her, the city shouted. She did not. Her silence was not absence. It was architecture, the still center that gave shape to everything else. A young journalist, maybe 23 at most, weaved through the crowd with a camera. His press badge swung against his chest, catching light with every movement. He wasn't looking for spectacle. The spectacle was everywhere. He was looking for something that didn't move, something that meant. He saw her, through the shifting bodies and the blur of banners. He caught sight of Lydia, standing just beyond the first barricade, hands clasped in front of her, head slightly tilted upward toward the blue glass of the building. The crowd around her surged and receded, but she remained perfectly still, as if anchored to the earth by grief itself. He lifted his camera. The lens framed her face, her posture, the faint reflection of the protest lights trembling against the glass behind her. He pressed the shutter. Once, twice, then again. The sound of the camera clicked like punctuation in the roar of the crowd. Across the street, a line of riot officers shifted formation. Plastic shields gleamed. The chant grew louder, an uncoordinated symphony of fury and devotion. Lydia did not flinch. A gust of wind tore through the avenue, scattering papers, whipping banners into the air. Her coat flared for a moment, then settled back into place. Someone near her shouted, "We're with you, Ms. Warren." Another voice echoed, "Justice for your daughter." Lydia turned slightly, her eyes meeting theirs for only a heartbeat. She gave no reply, but her look, steady, unwavering, carried more conviction than any chant. It was the look of someone who had already paid in full. Behind the barricades, one of the officers shifted uneasily. Sweat glistened under his helmet. He tried not to meet her gaze, but for a moment he did, and the line of defense felt thinner than it had seconds before. The journalist kept photographing, unaware that he was capturing something that would outlive the protest, the stillness that made the fury coherent, the center that made the movement human. The sky above turned the color of lead as evening drew near. Helicopters circled. News crews set up tripods. Drones hovered, their small red lights blinking like distant artificial stars. Through all of it, Lydia stood unmoved. In that stillness, the noise began to change. The chants fractured into murmurs, the crowd's energy slowing, shifting. People began to notice her, not because of who she was, but because of what she wasn't doing. She wasn't shouting, wasn't raising her arms, wasn't crying. She was enduring. And that endurance, quiet, unflinching, pulled the air taut with meaning. Someone nearby lowered their sign. Then another. Within minutes, a strange hush rippled through the mass of bodies, like a tide pulling back before it breaks again. The chants faltered and fell away. Silence spread. Tens of thousands stood still, following the posture of one woman who refused to move. The city itself seemed to pause. Traffic lights blinking uselessly at empty intersections. Helicopters hovering without sound. The hum of the crowd collapsing into something holy. It lasted less than a minute, but it felt eternal. In that silence, every sound that had been hidden returned. The flutter of paper signs, the static of distant radios, the slow beating of human hearts. Lydia closed her eyes just for a breath. The air around her vibrated with collective restraint. This quiet was no longer surrender. It was unity. Then, from the front of the crowd, a voice began again. Softer now. Imani Warren. Another voice joined. Imani Warren. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The name rolled through the street like thunder, spoken slowly. For the first time since the night of the hospital corridor, Lydia's hands moved. She unclasped them. Her fingers trembled. That familiar, living tremor. And then steadied as she lifted them just slightly, palms open at her sides. It wasn't a gesture of surrender. It was invocation. The photographer caught that moment too. The open hands, the city behind her. The riot shields before her. Click. That single image would travel faster than any statement the department could issue, faster than any correction or rebuttal. By dawn, it would be printed on front pages, projected onto buildings, carried on screens. Headlines would call her the mother who stood still. Commentators would debate her silence. Activists would turn her stillness into movement. But in this moment, Lydia knew none of that. She only knew the weight of air against her palms, the tremor fading. The noise of the world finally sounding like her daughter's name. When the police line advanced minutes later, when the shouts resumed and flashlights flared, she did not run. She stepped back once, slow, precise, and the crowd surged forward again, protecting her without words. Somewhere in the chaos, the young journalist kept photographing, chasing clarity through motion. But he would realize later that his most important shot had already been taken. That one still image of a mother who refused to speak because silence, in that moment, spoke everything. By nightfall, the street was littered with signs and broken barricades. Smoke from flares hung in the air, lit by street lamps that buzzed like tired guardians. Lydia walked away from the noise, her coat catching the faint red glow. She didn't look back at the building. She didn't need to. She knew now what power looked like when stripped of its sound, and how easily silence could turn into fire. The envelope arrived without a return address. Thick, unmarked, the kind that carries weight not from its paper but from what it dares to contain. Lydia found it just after sunset, resting on her doorstep like an accusation. No knock, no footsteps retreating down the hallway. Just silence. A silence that knew it had delivered something irreversible. Inside, a flash drive. No note! For a moment, Lydia simply stood there, holding it between her fingers. The object was so small, so harmless in appearance. Light enough to forget in a pocket. Ordinary enough to pass through 100 hands unnoticed. Yet it pulsed with a kind of moral gravity, as if it knew it had survived something, and was waiting to be seen. She locked the door behind her, pulled the curtains closed, and set the drive on the kitchen table. The overhead light hummed faintly, too bright against the stillness of the apartment. She unplugged it, leaving only the small desk lamp at the corner, a narrow cone of yellow light cutting across the wood like a confession under interrogation. When she finally inserted the drive into her laptop, the screen came alive with a single folder, Internal Report, Classified. Inside there were files, dozens, PDFs, audio logs, body cam transfers, internal memos, each dated, each labeled with the sterile precision of bureaucratic record-keeping. Her fingers hovered over the mouse for a long moment. Then she clicked. The first file was a transcript, a summary of the incident written by someone who had never been there. She read slowly, eyes tracing the words like they were written in another language. Every line was careful, procedural, deliberately bloodless. Words like resisted and non-lethal engagement replaced the raw reality of her daughter's cries. Next, a timestamp log. The entries skipped seconds, then minutes. Whole fragments of time missing. Gaps where the violence had lived, now erased. She scrolled and the pattern became clear. Evidence tampering. Statement alteration. Unauthorized video redactions. Her jaw clenched. The rhythm of her breathing slowed, then steadied. She clicked open another file. This one marked draft for press release. It contained the same words she'd heard at the department's podium. We regret the incident. The officers involved followed appropriate procedure. Now, reading those sentences again, knowing their origin, she could almost see the fingerprints on each one, the edits, the substitutions, the buried conscience of a system that spoke only to defend itself. When the printer started, the sound was too loud for the room, mechanical, relentless. Page after page slid out, the words stacking like bricks in a wall. Lydia stood beside it, waiting, collecting them one by one. The air filled with the faint chemical scent of toner, the smell of truth becoming matter. She spread the pages across her kitchen table, aligning them with deliberate care. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Each sheet glowed under the lamplight, white against the dark wood, fragile and incriminating. The table became an anatomy of deceit, every gap, every falsified detail. A wound mapped in paper. Outside, the city was quiet. Inside, the only sound was the soft rustle of pages as Lydia turned them, annotated them, built a map of what they had tried to bury. At the edge of the table, one page stood out, a scanned internal memo from a Sergeant Torres. The name stopped her. The same woman from the parking garage. The reluctant whistleblower. Her handwriting marked the margin. Didn't sign off on this version. They edited without review. For the first time that night, Lydia exhaled, the breath leaving her like a confession. She circled the line with a red pen. Then another. Then another. Each mark deepened her resolve. Hours passed. Coffee cooled in untouched cups. The pile of paper grew until it seemed to occupy the whole room, creeping across chairs, pressing against the edges of her solitude. She pinned some pages to the wall with tape, forming patterns, timelines, contradictions, names. Her living room began to resemble an investigation unit, except this one was built by grief, not authority. At one point, her printer jammed. The silence that followed was sudden, oppressive. Lydia stared at the frozen machine, its single red light blinking like an unblinking eye. She reached out, unjammed the page, and the words stared back at her. An internal correspondence marked for internal use only. Public narrative must emphasize noncompliance. Recommend emotional framing around officer safety. She read the sentence twice. Then again, her hand trembled as she smoothed the paper flat. This was not just corruption. It was choreography. A performance rehearsed at the cost of her daughter's truth. By midnight, every surface in her kitchen bore evidence. The lamp cast a steady light, cutting the room into zones of brightness and shadow, the seen and the concealed. Lydia stood in the center, surrounded by paper, and for a moment it looked like she was standing inside a blizzard of ghosts. She realized then that this, all of this, was labor. Not revelation. Truth wasn't something you found. It was something you built piece by piece against resistance. It required work, time, endurance, and a willingness to see what others refused to. When she finally shut the laptop, the room felt heavier, as if the air itself understood the weight of what it now contained. She stacked the pages neatly, aligning corners with precision. The pile stood like a monument, not to victory but to persistence. At the very top, she placed the memo about emotional framing. Her hand lingered on it, then she whispered, not to the room, not even to herself, but to the paper. They wanted control of the story. She looked up, meeting her own reflection in the dark kitchen window. Her eyes didn't waver. Now it's mine. The printer light blinked once more and went dark. The room returned to silence. The law office sat at the edge of downtown, a converted brick warehouse that looked neither rich nor inviting. Its sign was small, the letters fading under years of sun and indifference. Johnson and Cole, civil rights attorneys. The glass door reflected the street behind Lydia as she entered, a faint echo of herself following her inside. The lobby was quiet, too quiet. No receptionist, just a faint hum from an overworked radiator and the tick of a wall clock that seemed to count time more slowly than the world outside. She stood there, holding the folder that contained the evidence, the files, the photographs, the paperweight of her daughter's story. From the hallway, a voice called softly, "Ms. Warren?" Malik Johnson emerged from his office, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened as if he'd been fighting with documents instead of people. He was tall, with the posture of someone who had learned how to listen before he spoke. "Thank you for coming in," he said. Lydia nodded once. "You said you've read the files." "I did." His tone was even, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how much truth a system can tolerate before it begins to break. "Let's sit." His office was smaller than she expected. No trophies, no framed degrees crowding the walls, only books stacked in uneven towers, and a single window half covered by blinds. On his desk, a legal pad lay open beside a black fountain pen. Lydia placed her folder in front of him and stepped back, as though handing over something sacred. Malik opened it carefully, glancing through the pages. "Sergeant Torres sent this?" "She didn't say her name." "But yes," he nodded, flipping through the memos. His eyes stopped on a paragraph, the line about public narrative and emotional framing around officer safety. His hand paused there, pen tapping the margin. "This is deliberate," he said quietly. "This isn't negligence. It's orchestration." Lydia didn't answer. He looked up. "You know what happens when we file this kind of suit?" She held his gaze. "They come after us." He gave a small, grim smile. "Exactly. They'll question your daughter's behavior, your parenting, your motive. They'll dig for anything they can use. And when that fails, they'll stall. Months. Years. The law gives them time, and time is their best weapon." Lydia's voice was calm, almost measured. "I'm not here to win quickly. I'm here to win right." For a moment, Malik said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. "You remind me of someone," he said. "A woman I represented years ago. Her son was killed by a deputy. She told me the same thing. What happened to her?" He hesitated, then said, "They settled. Confidentially." Lydia's face remained still, but her hands, folded in her lap, tightened slightly. "Then we won't settle." Her tone left no room for persuasion. Malik nodded slowly. "Then we file." He reached for the pen, uncapped it, and turned the legal pad toward her. The contract lay ready, the formal initiation of war disguised in polite paragraphs. "This makes it official," he said. "Attorney-client privilege. I represent you pro bono. The case will be filed as Warren v. City of Glenford." Lydia took the pen. For a moment, she looked down at the page without writing. The ink shimmered faintly under the desk lamp, black, dense, absolute. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. She signed. The sound of the pen scratching across paper was soft, but in the small office it filled the air with weight. When she set the pen down, Malik exhaled. "You understand. The city will protect itself before it protects truth. The law doesn't heal, Ms. Warren. It just exposes." "Good," Lydia said. "That's what I want." He studied her, this woman who had walked through grief and into purpose without changing her expression. He saw no rage, no collapse, only focus. The kind of focus that frightened institutions. "I'll need to prepare you," he said. "Depositions, hearings, media requests. They'll try to wear you down." "They already did," she said quietly. "This time, I'm the one standing." He closed the folder and pressed his hand flat against it as though sealing the pact. "Then we move forward." They both stood. For a brief second, silence filled the room. Not awkward, but ceremonial. Then Malik extended his hand. "For what it's worth," he said, "this case, where it's going to change more than you think." Lydia met his eyes. "That's why it scares them." The handshake was firm. Two people who understood that justice, stripped of sentiment, was labor and sacrifice. When she left his office, The sky outside had dimmed into that peculiar half-light before night fully claims the city. Street lamps flickered on one by one, as though following her steps. She walked slowly, the signed contract tucked beneath her arm. Through the glass door, the reflection of her own face met hers again, faint, fragmented but unmistakably resolute. Behind her, Malik stood at his window watching her cross the street. In his hand, the signed paper still felt warm. The ink shimmered where it hadn't yet dried, catching the last of the sun like a wound that refused to close. He placed it gently in a file marked Warren v. Glenford Police Department and slid it into the drawer. The sound of it closing echoed like the first click of a lock. Outside, Lydia kept walking, past the courthouse, past the government buildings whose windows were already dark. The city loomed around her, glass, steel, and silence. Each building seemed to reflect her image back at her, multiplied, refracted, unstoppable. She tightened her grip on the folder and whispered under her breath, "Now we begin." The conference room was too bright, the kind of brightness that didn't illuminate. It interrogated. Fluorescent light hummed above like a low electrical breath, sterile and unblinking. The table in the center stretched longer than necessary, its surface smooth enough to reflect the faces leaning over it. At one end sat Lydia Warren. Her posture was composed, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. A folder lay before her, not as a shield but as a weapon waiting to be drawn. Across from her, the officers arrived one by one. Their uniforms replaced by suits, their authority exchanged for the soft arrogance of men who still believed the system would hold. The stenographer sat near the corner, her fingers poised over the keys, her eyes down, a silent machine built to record what others tried to disguise. Malik Johnson sat beside Lydia, quiet, watchful. His notepad was nearly blank. He had learned that silence unnerves the guilty more than words ever could. When the first officer, Sergeant Hale, took his seat, the air changed, a subtle tightening. He adjusted his tie, took a sip from a bottle of water, and avoided looking at Lydia. The city's attorney, a man named Douglas Raines, cleared his throat. "We're on record. Deposition of Sergeant Thomas Hale, taken on behalf of the plaintiff." The stenographer's keys began to click, the sound sharp, mechanical, relentless. Malik leaned forward slightly. "Sergeant Hale, please state your role on the night of April 3rd. Hale's voice was steady, rehearsed. "I was supervising officers responding to a call of a disturbance near Pine and Maple." Malik's tone was clinical. "And at what point did you engage with the subject, Imani Warren?" Hale's gaze flicked toward Lydia for a fraction of a second, then back to the papers in front of him. "I did not personally engage." I observed from a distance. Lydia's eyes didn't move. Her breath did not quicken. But she noted the detail from a distance. Malik asked, "Is that your voice heard on the body cam footage at timestamp 2248? Hale hesitated. "I don't recall." Click. The stenographer's fingers froze for a moment, then continued. "You don't recall giving the order to subdue?" Malik asked. "Not specifically." Lydia watched the man's hands. They fidgeted with the cap of his pen. Twist, release, twist, release. The movement was small but constant. It wasn't nervousness. It was the rhythm of control. When Malik played the short clip, sound only, the words filled the room. "Take her down, now." Hale's jaw tensed. "That could be anyone," he said. "It's your voice, isn't it?" Malik pressed. "I don't believe so." Malik leaned back, letting the silence grow. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder now. Hale shifted in his seat. Across the table, Lydia's gaze never broke. She had seen this performance before, the choreography of denial, the ease of practiced deceit. It wasn't rage she felt anymore. It was study, observation, the slow, meticulous gathering of truth through the smallest betrayals of body language. Another officer followed, then another, each with their own variations of evasion. I don't recall to the best of my recollection. I followed procedure. Their words were interchangeable, their tone identical. The table became the stage where conscience was tested and found wanting. At one point, Officer Radley, the one who had held her daughter down, sat directly across from Lydia. His eyes met hers only once, then darted away, Malik's questions cut with precision. "Officer Radley, can you explain why your report omits the 47 seconds between restraint and unresponsiveness?" "I wasn't aware there was a gap." "Then how do you explain this?" Malik slid a printed still frame across the table. Lydia recognized it. The image of her daughter's body on the pavement, one hand outstretched. Radley's throat moved, a faint swallow. "That must be what?" Leak interrupted. A technical glitch. Lydia felt something inside her shift. Not anger, not sorrow. Something colder. A realization that evil didn't require malice. Only the absence of doubt. The stenographer's fingers caught every syllable. The machine had no morality, but its record would not lie. For hours, the questions continued. Each officer recited his truth like scripture, practiced and precise. Lydia sat through it all, her silence a counterweight to their performance. At one point, Malik asked quietly, "Ms. Warren, would you like to make a statement for the record?" She looked up. The room turned toward her. Her voice, when it came, was calm, almost detached. "No questions," she said. "Just observations." Malik gave a slight nod. The officers shifted uneasily. None met her gaze now. She spoke again, softly. "It's strange. You all remember everything except the parts that matter." The stenographer hesitated, glancing up, unsure if she should type it. Malik gave a subtle gesture. She did. The words entered the record, permanently. When the final deposition ended, the city attorney gathered his papers with brisk efficiency. "We'll provide transcripts within 30 days, he said. Malik replied, "We'll be waiting." The officers filed out. The door clicked shut behind them. The room felt heavier now, saturated with something invisible. The residue of lies repeated until they sounded like truth. Lydia stood slowly. Her hands rested on the table, palms flat, feeling the cool surface beneath her. The table had absorbed everything. Every denial, every half-truth, every silence. It was not just furniture. It was witness. Malik packed his notes, watching her. "You held steady," he said quietly. "I'm learning their language," she replied. He studied her face. "And what does it say?" "That they've mistaken comfort for innocence." She turned and walked toward the door. The fluorescent light followed her in reflection across the polished surface of the table, a long, white streak that looked almost like a scar. When the door closed behind her, the hum of the room continued. The stenographer sat alone, replaying the day's audio to verify the record. The same words repeated again and again. "I don't recall. I followed procedure. I don't recall." Each repetition dulled meaning until only cadence remained, the heartbeat of a system that functioned best in moral numbness. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, that particular scent of places designed to appear timeless so that their authority might seem eternal. High ceilings, polished wood, and the echo of restrained voices filled the space. Everything here was choreographed. Where to stand, when to rise, when to speak. Lydia Warren sat in the second row of the gallery behind her attorney. She wore black again, the same shade she had worn at the hospital, at the committee hearing, at every stage of this slow dismantling. The color had become more than mourning. It was uniform. Malik Johnson sat before her at the plaintiff's table, his back straight, his notes arranged in immaculate order. The defense occupied the opposite side, 4 lawyers, 3 laptops. A tower of binders labeled Evidence AF. The officers sat behind them in pressed suits, their faces arranged into neutral expressions. Disciplined, sympathetic, empty. The judge entered, and everyone rose. His robe swayed as he took his seat, black upon black, authority cloaked in ritual. Court is now in session. Case number 17294, Warren v. City of Glenford Police Department. The clerk's voice echoed off the wood. Lydia's heart did not race. She had trained it not to. Malik began with the facts, not the kind that made headlines, but the ones buried in timestamps and memos. He spoke with deliberate calm, each sentence weighed, each pause precise. "This case is not about an accident," he said. "It is about choice. The choice to falsify, to conceal, to distort. The choice to treat a human life as a narrative problem." The jurors watched him closely. 12 ordinary citizens caught between the gravity of justice and the fatigue of bureaucracy. Then the defense rose. Raines, the same man from the depositions, adjusted his cufflinks and began to speak. His voice carried the tone of authority that expected agreement. "This is a tragedy," he said, "but not a crime. Officers are asked to make split-second decisions in dangerous situations. The deceased, while a victim of circumstance, acted in a manner that gave those officers reason to fear for their safety." The word fear hung in the air, sterile and heavy. It had become the country's most versatile absolution. Lydia's gaze did not move. Her silence had become its own testimony, the weight that pressed against every justification uttered in the room. When the first witness was called, Officer Radley. He walked to the stand with rehearsed humility. The bailiff swore him in. The Bible touched his palm like paper. He spoke of confusion, of chaos, of voices shouting. "It all happened so fast," he said. "We followed procedure," Malik stood. "And this is your signature on the report that omits the timestamp between restraint and unresponsiveness?" "Yes." "And you reviewed this before submission?" "I did." Malik stepped closer. "Then tell the jury what happened in those 47 seconds. Radley blinked, his jaw tightening. "I can't recall." Malik didn't look at the judge, didn't look at the jury. He looked only at the officer. "You can't recall the moment a 17-year-old girl stopped breathing beneath your weight?" The courtroom went still. Radley's lawyer objected, tone, phrasing, insinuation. The judge sustained it. Lydia's hands clenched in her lap, her fingernails pressing crescents into her palm. The pain grounded her. The silence again was hers to command. Witness after witness followed. Each uniformed voice repeated the same careful script. "I feared for my safety. I perceived resistance. I acted in accordance with training." The repetition dulled the words into mantra, a bureaucratic psalm to self-preservation. Then Malik called Sergeant Torres. The courtroom stirred. Even the defense looked uneasy. She entered the stand with the weariness of someone who had already chosen her side and accepted the cost. When sworn in, her voice trembled only once. Malik asked, "Sergeant, were you aware of the alterations made to the official report?" Torres hesitated, glancing at the rows of officers behind the defense table. Their stillness was a kind of threat. "Yes," she said finally. The word seemed to echo longer than it should have. Malik nodded slowly. "And who made those alterations?" She swallowed. "The chief's office. Under direction from legal." Raines objected. "Relevance, speculation." The judge overruled. Malik pressed gently. "What was removed?" Torres's voice thinned. "Body cam footage. Officer statements that contradicted the official narrative." "And why?" "To maintain public confidence." A murmur rippled through the courtroom before the judge's gavel brought silence again. Malik's tone softened. "Thank you, Sergeant." Torres lowered her gaze. "I should have said something sooner." Lydia's eyes met hers, steady, forgiving nothing but recognizing everything. The same tremor ran through her fingers, the one that had started the night she first sat in the hospital corridor. It returned now, not as weakness but as proof of life. When the defense cross-examined, they tried to fracture her testimony. "You have no written order," Raines said. "No recording, no email." "No," Torres admitted. "So what you're offering is your opinion." She shook her head once. "No, my conscience." The jury shifted. Malik didn't need to say anything more. He knew the power of a single line spoken with exhaustion instead of anger. When the day's session ended, the courtroom emptied slowly. The reporters whispered, pens scratching. The officers filed out without glancing toward Lydia. She remained seated, the last to rise. The judge had adjourned, the lights dimmed, but she stayed, looking at the witness stand, that narrow box of wood elevated above the floor. It was strange, she thought. The place meant for truth was also a cage. She imagined her daughter there, not as defendant or victim, but as witness to her own final moment. How would she have spoken? What words could contain what had been done to her? Malik returned, placing a hand on the bench beside her. "Tomorrow's closing arguments," he said. She nodded. "They'll push for settlement again tonight," he added. "They're afraid." "I want them afraid," she replied. Her voice carried no hatred, only certainty. As they left, the janitor entered wheeling a cart of supplies. The faint smell of bleach followed. He wiped the table where the officers had sat, erasing fingerprints, erasing residue. The room returned to order, to cleanliness. But order, Lydia thought, was the system's disguise, its way of hiding blood in polished wood. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. The judge's bench loomed high, the flags behind it unmoving, the seal of the state glinting under the dim lights. For all its symmetry, the room was still built on imbalance, the weight of power pressing downward. Lydia exhaled slowly. "You can scrub the tables," she murmured. "You can't clean the truth." Then she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing through the hall. The courthouse was too quiet that morning. Even the murmurs seemed to die against the marble walls, absorbed into the building's long memory of disappointment. Reporters lined the hallway like vultures in suits, their cameras dangling from their necks, waiting for the fall. Inside, the courtroom was colder than usual. The air conditioning hummed over the tension. Lydia sat in the same seat she had claimed since the trial began. Second row, center. Malik sat ahead of her, head bowed over his notes, though there was nothing left to read. The jury filed in, 12 faces carved from exhaustion, their expressions arranged into solemn neutrality. Lydia watched them as if she could still find humanity there. A flicker, a tremor, anything. She found none. The judge adjusted his glasses, voice steady. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." A pause. The rustle of paper. The sound of someone's shoe scuffing the floor. "In the case of Warren versus City of Glenford Police Department, we find the defendants—" Another breath. Not guilty." The words fell cleanly, without tremor, without echo. Like a blade dropped into still water. Lydia did not blink. The courtroom erupted. A swell of whispers, camera shutters, restrained gasps. Malik exhaled sharply, a quiet curse under his breath. The defense lawyers exchanged the small, practiced nods of men who had merely done their job. Lydia remained motionless. The judge's gavel came down once, a single percussive note of finality. It did not sound like authority. It sounded like closure pretending to be justice. "This court is adjourned." Chairs scraped. People rose. The room moved without her. Malik turned to her, eyes searching, voice low. "Lydia," she shook her head once. No words. Her body was still, but something in her deep core hardened. Grief folded in on itself, compacted into something unbreakable. A reporter's flash caught her face. Not tears, not rage, but that terrible calm. The photograph would appear on front pages the next morning under headlines about community, reaction, but no caption would capture the truth of what lived in her eyes, the knowledge that the law had just declared her daughter's life expendable. The officers stood, shaking hands with their counsel. One of them, Radley, glanced toward her just briefly. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tight, his eyes flickered away. Guilt or discomfort, it didn't matter. Both were useless now. Lydia rose, every movement deliberate. She reached for her bag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked down the aisle. The cameras turned toward her like a tide. Questions fired from every direction. "Mrs. Warren, do you have a statement? Do you plan to appeal? What would you say to the officers today?" She did not answer. Her silence filled the room like smoke, invisible, choking. Outside, the courthouse steps were lined with people. Protesters, supporters, skeptics. The ecosystem of outrage. Signs waved. "Justice for Imani, end police brutality. We see you." Lydia descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the open air. The crowd parted for her, not out of pity but respect. She passed through them as if carried by a current she no longer felt. A voice called her name. A young woman holding a microphone, trembling slightly. "Mrs. Warren, do you still believe in the system?" Lydia stopped, the cameras closed in. The microphones leaned forward like hungry mouths. She turned her head slightly toward the woman, her expression still calm, her tone steady. "I believe in truth," she said. "And truth doesn't need belief." Then she walked on. Behind her, chants began to rise, low at first, then growing, rippling outward through the crowd. The noise followed her to the bottom of the steps, to the waiting street where the sun caught on car roofs, and the wind smelled faintly of exhaust and rain. She stopped at the crosswalk. The courthouse loomed behind her. its facade clean, its columns unblemished. The building looked eternal, as though it had weathered every era without ever being touched by consequence. She looked back once. The flag on its pole shifted slightly in the breeze, casting a shadow over the marble seal above the doors. The gavel's echo still lived somewhere inside her, the sound of a system closing ranks around itself, sealing her daughter's story behind polished wood and legal phrasing. She realized then that justice was not lost here. It had never been present. The crosswalk light turned green. Lydia stepped forward. The world moved on as it always did. News cycles shortened. Hashtags faded. Faces turned toward the next outrage. But Lydia Warren remained. She retreated from the noise, from the interviews, from the vigils, from the sympathy that tasted like pity. Her house became a cell of purpose. The blinds stayed half drawn. The television stayed off. The only sounds were the rustle of paper and the low hum of her old printer, working through the night. Stacks of documents covered her dining table. Internal memos, depositions, disciplinary records. Each page was part of a body the system thought it had buried. She was reassembling it, one fragment at a time. She no longer answered calls from journalists. Most of them wanted grief, not truth. They wanted the tremble in her voice, not the evidence in her hands. So she stopped speaking. Instead, she began to send. It started with a single manila envelope, postmarked from nowhere, addressed to an independent reporter who had once written about wrongful convictions. Inside, a copy of Sergeant Torres's redacted testimony, the original timestamps reinstated in her own hand. No note, no signature, only truth unsigned. Then another envelope and another. Each went to a different recipient, a civil rights nonprofit in D.C., a local watchdog group, a law professor who specialized in police misconduct. The post office clerk learned not to ask questions. Every envelope was identical, cream-colored, unmarked, sealed with a single strip of tape. They carried no words, only the evidence she had gathered from years of listening to lies. At night, Lydia sat by the window, watching the streetlight flicker outside. The same one that had burned all through Imani's childhood. The same one she'd once complained made her room too bright to sleep. Now that light had become her metronome. Each flicker marked the passing of time. Each second another small erosion of silence. On social media, the story shifted. Commentators debated. Some called Lydia a fraud, a bitter mother, a woman refusing to heal. Others called her a martyr. Neither was correct. She was an operator. Her silence became strategy. The less she said, the more they speculated. The more they speculated, the more attention returned to the cracks she had already widened. Malik visited once, weeks after the verdict. He found her kitchen the same as before, sterile, organized, lit only by a desk lamp angled over paper. "You're making noise again," he said softly. "Scanning the documents." "I'm not speaking," she replied. "That's not the same thing." She looked up. "They think the story ended with that gavel," Malik exhaled. "And you're going to prove them wrong?" "I already have." He smiled faintly, not of approval but recognition. He had seen the same expression on clients who refused to die quietly. When he left, Lydia remained at the table, sorting the next envelope. Her hands moved steadily, the tremor gone. Precision had replaced grief. Weeks passed, then months. A story broke, small at first on a mid-tier blog. Leaked documents suggest police report altered in Glenford case. The byline belonged to the same journalist who had received the first envelope. By morning, larger outlets had picked it up. The department issued a brief denial, then a longer one. The mayor promised an internal review. Lydia watched it all unfold from her kitchen. The television, once dormant, glowed again. She didn't smile. She only folded another set of papers, slid them into an envelope, sealed it with tape, across town. Sergeant Torres opened her email to find a message from an anonymous sender. A single scanned document. Her own testimony, the one she thought had vanished. She stared at it for a long time, then at the subject line. No greeting, no name, just 2 words. Keep going. The silence campaign grew without Lydia ever leaving her house. Others began to send, to leak, to post. Each act small, untraceable, deliberate. The story no longer belonged to the city. It belonged to the network of the disquieted, those who had seen the machinery grind a body and call it order. By the time national outlets arrived, the narrative had shifted completely. What began as a case had become a movement without leaders, without slogans. Its fuel was paper, its weapon silence. One night Lydia stood at her window again. The streetlight flickered, and in that pale rhythm she saw her daughter's face, not as she was in the hospital, but alive, laughing, mid-sentence. For the first time in months, Lydia spoke aloud. Her voice was calm, even almost reverent. "They built a system on silence," she said. "I just changed who it serves." The words dissolved into the dark. She sealed another envelope. Outside, dawn began to color the sky, thin, cold, unhurried. The downfall did not come as an explosion. It came as a quiet sequence of administrative memos, sealed subpoenas, and early morning resignations. The Glenford Police Department, once defiant, once armored in language and law, began to split from within. It started with an anonymous video posted without fanfare. It appeared on a small independent news site at 3:17 a.m. A grainy recording from a storage room. Two officers standing beside a metal bin, feeding files into a shredder. The timestamp matched the night after Lydia Warren's death. One of the men looked directly at the camera before switching off the light. Within hours, it spread. By noon, the department held a briefing. By evening, the mayor called it deeply concerning. By nightfall, the city understood what Lydia had known from the beginning, that institutions do not confess. They decay. Lydia sat at her kitchen table, watching the coverage on the same small television that had once shown her daughter's face in hospital footage. The same lamp illuminated the papers before her, the same steady glow. Only the air felt different now, thinner, sharper, charged with the slow satisfaction of inevitability. Malik called, his voice low with disbelief. "It's unraveling," he said. "I know. They're talking indictments. Torres's testimony is being re-examined. The DA's office wants to reopen the case." Lydia didn't answer immediately. She watched the screen, the police chief's face projected under the studio lights, pallid and sweating. Words tripping over denials. "Do you want to be involved again?" Malik asked. "No," she said. "I just want to watch it rot." He was silent for a long time. "You did this, you know." She shook her head, though he couldn't see it. "No, they did." Outside, rain had started to fall, slow, rhythmic drops against the window pane. The sound folded into the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of the lamp. Domestic sounds steady as ritual. The television cut to footage of boxes being carried from the department's evidence room. Officers in plain clothes avoided cameras. The anchor's voice spoke of systemic malpractice, obstruction, institutional failure. The same vocabulary of outrage that had once been denied. The light in Lydia's kitchen was soft but merciless. It illuminated everything it touched. The creases in her hands, the stacks of printed documents now yellowing at the edges, the dust in the air suspended like ghosts. She thought of that first night in the hospital corridor, the glass between her and her daughter. How helpless she had felt then, how distance had seemed an impenetrable wall. Now that same distance was her weapon. She had stayed removed, unseen while the machine consumed itself. On screen, they showed the department's entrance, the emblem being pried from the wall for renovation, a hollow gesture of reform. Lydia turned off the volume and watched in silence. The picture moved without sound, mouths opening, cameras flashing, uniforms moving like a choreography of defeat. She remembered her mother's words once, long ago. Rot doesn't announce itself. It waits. That was what justice truly was, not a verdict, not a gavel, not even a headline. Justice was the long patience of rot, working quietly until the structure could no longer stand. When the segment ended, she stood and went to the sink. The rain outside had thickened, streaking the glass. For a moment, her reflection merged with it, half light, half shadow. She returned to the table and turned the lamp slightly, angling it toward the wall. The light flared across the papers, then softened. The lamp had been with her through everything. The hearings, the late-night printing, the envelopes. Once it had illuminated despair. Now it illuminated ruin. The same light, a different purpose. Malik's words echoed in her mind. You did this? No, she thought. I waited for the truth to do what truth always does. On television, breaking news scrolled across the bottom of the screen. 3 officers indicted. Chief placed on leave pending investigation. City attorney resigns. Each word was clean, bureaucratic, and devastating. Lydia closed her eyes. For the first time in years, her body felt still. Not rigid. Not braced, simply still. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far off. In the next room, the printer came to life unexpectedly, its light blinking. Forgotten file queued days ago emerging into the quiet. The page slid out slowly. Lydia walked over and picked it up. It was a copy of Imani's school essay, something she must have scanned long before when she was cataloging every memory. The title read, "What Justice Means to Me." She read the first line aloud. Justice is when people stop pretending not to see. Her throat tightened, but she did not cry. Instead, she placed the page beneath the lamp, smoothing it flat against the wood. The light trembled once, then steadied. The city's institutions were collapsing on screen. In her kitchen, the same light that once bore witness to grief now bore witness to consequence. It was not victory. It was something colder, purer, a reckoning without celebration. She turned the lamp off. The room plunged into shadow. Outside, the rain kept falling. The system was cleansing itself, she thought, not from guilt, but from the illusion of permanence. Morning arrived without ceremony. The hospital looked almost identical to the first time Lydia had stood there. The same sterile corridor, the same scent of antiseptic, the same quiet hum of machines beyond the glass. Yet something in the air was different. It felt less like containment and more like pause, a held breath before the return of sound. Lydia Warren lay in the same bed she had occupied for months, but her stillness was no longer the stillness of absence. The monitors whispered steady rhythm. The doctors had called it unexpected neurological recovery. The nurses called it a miracle. Lydia called it return. She stood before the glass again, her reflection faint against the morning light. The sun was different now, not the cold fluorescence of Chapter 1, but the soft amber of dawn slipping through half-open blinds. It painted the corridor in warmth the architecture had never intended. Her hands, once clenched, now rested open at her sides. There was still exhaustion in her body, but the tremor that had followed her through hearings, trials, and silence was gone. She had learned to carry stillness as power. The doctor approached quietly. His voice was respectful, measured, a tone she recognized from years of bureaucratic rehearsal. Though softer now, she's conscious. Still weak but responsive. Lydia nodded once. She didn't move. Would you like to go in? She looked at the glass again. That old companion, that witness. The first time she had stood here, it had been a wall. Now it was a mirror. She could see herself and beyond herself the life she had fought not to lose. Yes, she said. Inside, the room was warm. Machines blinked like patient stars. Imani's eyes were half open, unfocused, wandering through the light until they found her mother's silhouette. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Imani's lips parted. Mom? Lydia's breath caught, then steadied. I'm here. A pause, fragile, infinite. You came back, Imani whispered. Lydia sat beside her, her hand hovering before finally resting on her daughter's. The contact felt unreal, as though the world itself had become glass, transparent, fragile, alive with reflection. I never left, Lydia said. The words were simple, but beneath them lived years of courtroom silence, of rain-soaked nights, of manila envelopes sealed with quiet fury. All of it distilled into one act of presence. Imani's fingers shifted weakly. What happened? Everything, Lydia said, and nothing that should have. The girl's gaze wandered toward the window, where sunlight fractured across the blinds into thin, horizontal bars of gold. It's morning, she said, almost to herself. Yes. Lydia watched the light climb across the sheets, the same pattern she had memorized in every waiting room. Every hearing, every moment the world had tried to convince her that stillness meant surrender. Outside the room, footsteps echoed, nurses, doctors, the machinery of care continuing its work. But Lydia heard something else beneath it now, the faint pulse of possibility. The system still stood. The courthouse still functioned. The city still issued its statements. The same men still spoke into microphones about reform, but something had shifted quietly, irrevocably. A mother had taught the city how to see. Imani turned toward her. Did they? She stopped, her throat catching on the unspoken word. Lydia shook her head gently. They fell apart, she said. Not the way we hoped. Good enough. Silence filled the room again, not heavy, not suffocating. Just silence, ordinary and human. The doctor returned briefly to check vitals, murmured something about rest and gradual recovery. Lydia nodded, barely hearing. Her attention was fixed on the rise and fall of her daughter's chest, the sound of living breath. When he left, Lydia rose and walked to the window. The view overlooked the city, its streets glinting with sunlight, its buildings clean and indifferent. Somewhere down there, people were already on their way to work, to schools, to hearings that would decide new names, new lives. She pressed her hand lightly to the glass. The reflection met her palm, her face superimposed over the cityscape, the faint image of Imani behind her. 3 generations of sight, woman, child, nation. The light shifted again and the reflection blurred. For the first time, the glass didn't divide. It joined. Behind her, Imani's voice came softly. Will it happen again? Lydia didn't turn. It already is, she said. But now they know we're watching. A small exhale. Fragile peace. The nurse entered quietly, adjusting a line, smiling with the professionalism of someone trained to witness miracles without trembling. Lydia stepped aside. She looked once more at her daughter, alive, blinking into a world that had broken and mended around her absence. Lydia's reflection caught her eye again in the window's sheen. She studied it, the tiredness in her eyes, the lines carved by endurance, the faint trace of something harder to name, grace born from fire. The city stretched beyond the glass, bright and cold. News drones still hovered above courthouses. Commentators still debated. The same machinery turned, but under it something had cracked. Not loudly, not spectacularly, but deeply. Enough to let light through. Lydia stepped back from the window, her reflection dissolving into brightness. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed, the same mechanical hum as before, yet now sunlight cut through it, softening every hard edge. She walked the corridor once more, slow and deliberate. Nurses passed, visitors whispered, doors clicked shut. The world moved. At the end of the hall, she paused. Through the far window, she could see the whole city. The courthouse dome gleaming in the distance. The river winding through gray concrete and beyond it. The horizon, the same glass that once confined her, now framed the view. She touched it again, fingertips against the cool surface. Her reflection looked back, merged with the light. This was not victory. It was continuity. Resistance was not something she had done. It was something she had passed on. She turned, the corridor stretching before her, bright, sterile, infinite, and began to walk.